You think you need a big, expensive telephoto prime lens to take pro-quality bird and wildlife photos just like these? Spoiler alert, you don't. I took all of these photos with lenses that didn't break the bank or my back, and you can do it too. Are you frustrated because you think that your gear is holding you back from taking great bird and wildlife photos? Contrary to popular belief, you don't need to spend as much money on a lens as you would on a nice SUV to be a pro bird or wildlife photographer. You know, I have an article coming out soon in a big photo magazine, and guess what? All of the images in that article were taken with telephoto lenses that cost less than $3,000. Yeah, that's still a lot of money, but it's nothing compared with the really big lenses. And that's not all. I actually took most of the images featured in that article with a $900 telephoto lens. Hola amigos, I'm Greg Basco, a professional nature photographer and workshop leader based in Latin America, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I don't own a big prime telephoto lens. You know, and planning this video got me to thinking about the French Revolution. Stay with me here. I studied political science as a younger man, so I still think about these things on occasion. The French Revolution's rejection of privilege and its promotion of equality and brotherhood helped to inspire independence movements throughout my home region of Latin America, and indeed the colors of the flag of my adopted home country of Costa Rica were inspired by the ideals and colors of the French flag. I think bird and wildlife photography should be, and actually is, accessible to everyone, and not only to those relatively few photographers who can afford super expensive telephoto prime lenses. So in this video, I'll go through the pros and cons of big lenses compared with cheaper telephoto zooms, just like this one. And I'll explain how embracing the apparent drawbacks of affordable telezooms can actually benefit you as a photographer in 3 important ways. So while this video probably won't have the same historical impact as the French Revolution, it just might inspire you to revolutionize your own bird and wildlife photography. See what I did there? That's so cheesy. Let's get into it. So why do bird and wildlife photographers spend so much money on those big telephoto prime lenses? Well, these lenses are amazing. They offer fantastic image quality, snappy autofocus, and the ability to use teleconverters with good results. A 600mm f4 lens, for instance, becomes an 840mm lens with a wide open aperture of f5.6, and that same lens with a 2x teleconverter turns into a 1200mm lens with a wide open aperture of f8, and a 400mm f2.8 lens, which I will confess I would love to have in my bag, becomes a 560mm lens at f4 with a 1.4 TC, and an 800mm f5.6 lens with the 2x teleconverter. But man, these lenses will cost you between $11,000 and $15,000 more or less, and they're heavy. The big primes tend to weigh between 6 and 7 pounds, or even a bit more. That may not sound like much, but you can get tired lugging one around all day, and of course the weight and size makes them harder to travel with. So what about those cheaper telephoto zoom lenses? There are options under $3,000 like this for every system, and you can spend as little as $1,000 and do pro quality bird and wildlife photography. For the past year, I've been using the Canon 100 to 500mm RF zoom lens for my photography, and I am loving it. The autofocus is amazing. The stabilization, especially in conjunction with the IBIS, or in-body image stabilization, of my Canon R5 camera, is a lifesaver for handheld shooting in low light. And of course the sharpness is right on. Plus it's light at just 3 pounds and it focuses super closely. But from 2015 to the beginning of 2022, I did all of my telephoto work with the $1,000 Sigma 150 to 600mm contemporary zoom lens, and I published plenty of images taken with this lens in magazines and books throughout the world. But I have a confession. I didn't pay $1,000 for this lens. I actually bought it lightly used from a workshop client slash friend. April, how you doing? For just $600. Being able to get sharp results at that holy grail focal length of 600mm for around $1,000 and in a package that weighs just over 4 pounds is pretty amazing. It opens up the world of big lens photography to nearly anyone, and I think that's really cool. The image stabilization of that Sigma lens, however, is not great, and the autofocus, particularly with mirrorless cameras, is not as good as it is with lenses made for mirrorless. But I use that lens with both DSLR and mirrorless bodies to take images that I really like and that sold well, and I never had any issues with the build quality of that lens, even in wet environments like the rainforest or in dusty, dry habitats like the Atacama Desert. Now, the price, size, and weight savings of telezooms come at a cost, and that cost is light gathering capability. The wide apertures on these lenses are not that wide. For instance, the aforementioned Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter lens is at f6.3 at the long end, the same as the famed Sony 200 to 600 millimeter lens. And my Canon 100 to 500 millimeter lens is already at f7.1 at the long end. That means that you'll have to use about 1.3 to 1.7 stops more ISO to maintain the same shutter speed as you would with some of the big telephoto prime lenses. I've found that this is not actually a big deal since software like DxO Pure Raw, especially the new version 3, and Topaz Denoise AI now do such a good job with noise reduction. A second drawback of the telezooms is that you really don't want to use teleconverters with these lenses because you're losing even more light. That Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter lens at 600 millimeters, for instance, would be at f9 with a 1.4x TC and f13 with a 2x TC, and my Canon 100 to 500 millimeters would be at f10 with a 1.4 and f14 with a 2x TC. What's more, teleconverters do degrade optical performance to agree on any lens, and that effect is generally more pronounced with zoom lenses like these. So with these telezooms, you're basically limited to the longest focal length of the actual lens. The third main drawback, and probably the most important for many photographers, is that these more narrow apertures mean that it can be difficult to blur out the background in your photos. But that doesn't mean that you can't take that type of classic bird or wildlife photo with a frame-filling subject and a smooth background. The conditions just have to be right. Basically, with telezooms like this one, the background has to be farther away than it would with a telephoto prime to have max blur. So I'll take these kinds of photos, these classic photos, once in a while, as they're nice photos to have in a portfolio, but I'm not worried that I can't always do it. In fact, I'm sort of glad. You might be thinking, well, Greg, that's a bummer that I can't always fill the frame and set my subject off against a smooth background with these cheaper telephoto zoom lenses. Well, let's word your complaint a bit differently. Greg, I'm really sad that my cheaper telephoto zoom won't let me always take the same kind of photo over and over and over and over again. And when you hear it out loud, it sounds less like a complaint and more like an opportunity. And that's exactly why I think the primary benefit of big, expensive telephoto prime lenses is one that is a bit overrated. The very fact that these lenses allow us to consistently fill the frame with the subject and set that subject off against a smooth, monotone background becomes a kind of mental trap. You know, that classic bird wildlife photo with that isolated frame-filling subject is a good photo, but it's only one type of good bird or wildlife photo, and it's usually not the most interesting portrayal of a given subject. So just imagine if your portfolio consisted only of photos of frame-filling subjects like these, either static or in motion, set off against smooth, usually monotone backgrounds. That will get old pretty quickly to anyone who views your photos, and that includes magazine and book editors, by the way. You don't believe me? For this BBC Wildlife magazine article from last year on tapirs and conservation in Costa Rica, the editors were interested in only one of my classic type photos taken with a big telephoto prime lens, and they used that one, the smallest of all, in the article. So the photo that I took with the most expensive lens, a prime lens that I owned back in the day, actually paid me the least. And just the other day, I had a meeting with the publisher of my Costa Rica coffee table book, National Parks of Costa Rica. We're working on a second edition, and they told me straight out not to spend any effort on the classic bird wildlife photos when I'm out in the field making my trips to take new photos for the book. If we get a couple of new ones like that, they said that's fine, but they really want me to concentrate on photos that have a sense of place and tell a bit of a story. Nonetheless, I see a lot of photographers get frustrated if the subject is too far away. They either say that this situation sucks and they won't shoot at all, or they're thinking already of how much of a giant crop they can pull off in the computer. And by the way, if you saw the original files of many of those frame-filling shots out on the internet, you'd be surprised at the amount of cropping that's going on behind the scenes. So the first advantage of using a cheaper telephoto zoom is precisely that you can't always fill the frame. Telephoto zooms allow you, or sometimes even compel you, to break free of that mental jail of filling the frame and to embrace the small size of the subject in the frame, whether it's too far away or even when you zoom out purposefully to include more habitat. Here's a photo of a Chilean flamingo. It's fine. Here's another photo of Chilean flamingos that were too far away. This one has visual interest as a photo to me, not even knowing that it's a photo of birds or what it is, because it gives a sense of place and has a nice composition and interesting colors. And it tells a story of how they live in a salt lake high in the Atacama Desert at 14,000 feet near Chile's border with Bolivia. You know, I've taken many of my favorite recent wildlife and bird photos when I was focal length limited. There are a lot of air quotes going on in this video, or by intentionally choosing wider focal lengths on my telephoto zoom lenses to include more habitat. The second advantage of using a telezoom is that you can take that drawback of not always being able to render a smooth background and flip the script. Instead of thinking of the background as something to be minimized by default, you'll learn with these telezooms to consider how the background can contribute compositionally to help give your photo some context and a sense of place. Consider this photo of a flying snow goose. This is a really nice classic flight shot, but to me it's rather uninteresting because it lacks that sense of context. I much prefer these photos because they offer a clue about the habitat. So by getting out of that isolating your subject against a smooth background trap, your photo's backgrounds will no longer be just the absence of something. In fact, with practice, you can turn your backgrounds into a positive and important part of your bird and wildlife photography. And third, since you can use your cheaper telephoto zoom lens to include more of the surroundings in your bird and wildlife photos, you'll become a better photographer. Now, why do I say that? For two reasons. First, you'll start to think more about composition rather than just pointing and shooting at a frame-filling subject. And you'll also need to think more about light and different tones and colors in the parts of a wider scene in order to really nail your exposure where it counts. I think it's great that the world of bird and wildlife photography is now open to a wider audience. So if you don't have the budget to buy a giant telephoto lens or the physical ability to lug one around all day, check out a telephoto zoom and start taking some great photos of your favorite bird and wildlife subjects. And if you are fortunate to own a big telephoto prime lens, that's awesome. Take advantage of that great reach, the quick autofocus, and creamy bokeh. Yep, according to a Canon product management director, a fellow who is Japanese, that's the correct pronunciation of the word that we always stumble on. But remember that even with a big prime, you can still add diversity to your portfolio by including more of the environment when you can't fill the frame with your subject. Try it out, and I'm confident that you'll start to take some of your very favorite images. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that it's given you some ideas that you can put into practice in your own bird and wildlife photography. And if you did, I've heard lots of YouTubers urge you to smash the like and subscribe buttons below. But you can also just gently click them, and it's a win-win for all of us. I get the same results, and you save a little wear and tear on your mouse. If you'd like to take a workshop with me, I'd love to see you out in the field. Check out the link below to see my current workshop schedule. And finally, I should point out that a client/friend of mine named Eric suggested that the title of this video easily could have been "Size Doesn't Matter." Let me know in the comments down below if you think Eric was right and that should have been the title of this video. All right, see you next time, amigos.